I'm going to talk about a quick summary of some information that you may well already know, which relates to the recent release by the ABS of the preliminary Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander population estimates for 30th of June 2021. And they were released in September last year, so it might seem like old news. These are estimates that are part of the regular schedule of releases by the ABS following each census of population and housing, and they provide the basis for the rebasing of historical estimates and the production of a consistent time series of estimates and projections for use in reporting. So you might wonder why we're so interested in the release, given it's part of the regular schedules, and this lies around the fact that the 2021 release is significantly higher than was projected, and that has impacts on reporting for numerous indicators for the Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander population at the local, state and territory and national level. This impact won't, however, be seen until that full time series is released in the middle of next year. But in the meantime, all agencies are continuing to report on the old time series based on the 2016 census data. So I'm just going to give a quick potted history on how the 30th of June population estimates are produced. And that's the ABS is taking the census counts, then they adjust for net undercount or overcount, and then they make some additional adjustments for residents temporarily overseas and for backdating of births and deaths. So removing births that have occurred after the 1st of July up until the census date and adding back in deaths. And then that provides the basis for producing the preliminary estimate, which we have at the moment. And then they will revise that again for a final estimate, which is due out in August this year. So as I said earlier, our interest lies around the size, both numeric, the increase between 2016 and 2021 in both numerically and proportionally. And you can see that the census count at the national level went up by over 25%, or 163,000 people. And that compares with the 18% increase in the census count between 2011 and 2016. So it's notably bigger. And also, if we look at the Greater Capital City and rest of state, you can see that growth was faster in the Greater Capital City areas than in the rest of state areas. So, and just for a quick comparison, wrong way. If we take the Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander count out of the total population, then the rest of the Australian population count increased by around just over 8%. So you can see it's significantly different. So there's a number of reasons for the increase in the census count of the Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander population, and these are fairly well known. So we've got the standard demographic factors, the births, deaths and migration, both overseas and in the case of jurisdictional populations interstate. And the remaining increase lies around these non-demographic factors of identification mobility, so people changing or choosing to identify differently at different time points, and also an increased propensity to identify, and obviously the actual quality of the census itself in terms of collecting data on this population. So this is unashamedly just a snip from the ABS release, Understanding Changes in the Count. And I'll put this up there just to show you that the increase between 2016 and 2021, more than half of that was non-demographic. So more than half of the increase couldn't be explained by the standard demographics of births, deaths and migration, which is quite significant and a large increase from the 2011 to 2016 census jump. So I'm going to have a quick look at the shift in identification change. So people can choose, or someone may choose on their behalf, how that they will identify in a census. And we had a look at the Australian census longitudinal data set to get this information. It's not available for 2021 yet. So we've got 2011 on the left-hand side and 2016 on the right-hand side. And we're looking at the status that people have identified in 2011 on the left, and then if that's changed on the right-hand side, because people do choose to identify differently at different points in time. So you can see that the largest flow is for those consistently identifying as Aboriginal, and then of those that did change their identification status, the largest flow there is from non-Indigenous to Aboriginal. But there were also flows from all of the Indigenous categories to non-Indigenous and vice versa. So there's actually quite a lot of movement occurring. And I should just state that that's for Queensland, but you'll also see very similar, although smaller, Torres Strait Islander numbers for the rest of Australia. So we can break this down a little bit more and look at across 3 census periods, so 2006, 11 and 16. And you can see from this chart that nearly 7 in 10 consistently identified across all 3 censuses, and that just over 1 in 10 identified in an earlier census but chose not to in 2016. So again, we're seeing people's individuals' choice of whether they identify or not and how they identify. And then around 9% that were newly identified, so added into the count in 2011 and 2016. So having looked at those census counts quite quickly, we'll have a look at the population estimates, which is what is really going to affect the reporting. So as I said, the census counts are used to create the estimates. So this is the plot of the estimates and projections for the 3 subsequent censuses, 2006, 11 and 16. And the right-hand end of the solid line is where the estimate for the census year is. And you can see that for each time, the subsequent census year has been notably higher. And the 2021 dot there, which is where roughly the solid line will end for the 2021 time series, is that roughly 23.3% higher. So it is a big jump at the national level. And that's about, the increase numerically is 185,600 people. So I was asked by the QFCC to just break it down a little bit for states and territories. So you can see the 2016 ERP, so the estimate made by the ABS for 2016, 2021, the increase between the two and the proportional change. And what stands out there is the proportional increase for Victoria being 36.2%, which is a big jump for those guys down there and will have a big impact on their reporting. But the largest numerical jumps are retained by the 2 largest states with Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander populations of New South Wales with 74,000 and Queensland with 52,000 additional residents. So this is another way, sorry, I'm jumping around a little bit, but I want to emphasise. So this is another way of looking at the changes and potential impacts. So the darker bars here is from the 2016 census projection series for 2021. So this is what is in the current time series that we're using in the darker charts. And then the lighter colours is the additional residents that have been captured in the population at the national level. And you can see there that the largest differences are in those school age cohorts. So 5 to 14-year-olds in particular. And if we break that down by states and territories, again, the 10 to 14-year-olds are seeing, so this is the excess between the projection and the new estimate for states and territories by those age groups. So the 10 to 14-year-olds are seeing the largest differences in general across all jurisdictions, possibly, except the ACT, that's right. And the proportional differences for the jurisdictions, if you look in the top right corner, because that's where all the action is, that's New South Wales and Victoria with increases of over 20%. So that's a big jump and likely to impact on the data that will be reported for of high interest for this group in terms of child deaths and mortality. A different way to look at this, the populations, is to follow a cohort through. So taking the 0 to 4-year-olds in 2016 that were counted by states and territories and looking at how many 5 to 9-year-olds there were in 2021, 5 years later. And again, you can see for New South Wales and Queensland in particular, big jumps in that same cohort, which is probably reflecting that increased propensity to identify, or people changing their identification, or that in this case probably their children's identification. So we've also seen these increases happening in administrative data sets in Queensland. So on the left we have live births, which is different to registered births, because it doesn't include late registrations and things like that. So we're looking at Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander live births recorded by Queensland Health, which are up over 25%, and on the right are the school FTE enrolments from Schools Australia, and again, up over 20%. So we're seeing growth in these cohorts in other administrative data, which is supporting this growth in the population. So I'll hand over to Edwin now for the potential impacts.
Thanks, Ros. Like Ros mentioned, these increases in population estimates have a direct impact on service delivery planning and reporting. In some cases, they may cause a shift in the narrative around particular issues relating to the Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander population outcomes. I'll briefly run through some examples from the reporting our team typically works on to illustrate this point. So one example is the death rate for Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander children in Queensland. We have used a single year's worth of data instead of the usual 5-year average to account, usually to account for small numbers, just to illustrate the point here. The new rates are shown in the lighter colored circles and are generally lower than those based off the 2016 base census projections for 2021. This was also similar with child safety substantiation rates by age groups, where the rates were smaller for those using the larger population estimates as the new denominators, which are shown in the gold bar. And the impact is more pronounced in the 5 to 9 and 10 to 14-year-old age groups because of the change in age structure that Ross pointed out earlier. Another example put here just to demonstrate the point or the impact of this change in age structure from the new estimates on a whole of population age standardized crime rate that we usually report on. And this change is shown by the downward shift in the small circle in the top right, which is the Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander rate for 2021. In time series data such as this, the entire time series will actually shift with the release of the new population estimates and projections. And it's quite likely that the rate ratios comparison with the non-Indigenous population will also be affected, given that the shift in the non-Indigenous rate shown down the bottom right has not been as drastic as the Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander population age just standardized rates. And another outcome, so for outcomes with the proportion based on an ERP, such as target 3 of closing the gap shown on the slide here, the impact of the increase in population is more direct. For example, the published rate the published proportion, for 2021 for Queensland was 95.1 for target 3, which shows this target to be on track and potentially met for Queensland. However, the proportion drops to around 91%, so a bit below the 95% target when the new estimates of 4-year-olds were used to calculate this corresponding proportion. We do know that this estimate is just an experimental estimate that we created to demonstrate the potential impact of an increase of this magnitude for our reporting, as the official year before full-time schooling cohort for 2021 using the new estimates has not yet been released. Other states and territories with large increases in the 0 to 4-year-old population estimates for the Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander population will also likely see similar shifts in their outcomes. To wrap up, reporting that uses time series of estimates and projections for the Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander population will need recalculating, and this will include some of the data currently published for closing the gap targets. There will be some good news indicators where high denominator results in a lower rate or proportions, for example, incarceration, offending, and youth justice outcomes. While for others, the change will appear less positive, for example, participation in preschool education outcome as shown on this slide here. We also have a list of key dates for upcoming releases in this space, so we expect to see the final estimate of the 2021 Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander population based on the 2021 census around August this year. And in November, we should hopefully see the live tables for the Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander population, which will be a key input to their estimates and projections, which we expect to come up around the 3rd quarter of next year. And lastly, we've just got a slide of key sources of data that were used to inform this presentation, mainly from the ABS. So thank you.